Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us in the world, and welcome. My name is Geneva Blackmer, and I serve as the Interim Executive Director of the Interfaith Center at Miami University. For those of us joining us for the first time, the Interfaith Center is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that seeks to foster relationship building, dialogue, and social action. And I'm pleased to welcome you to today's discussion, Beyond Us versus Them, Jewish-Muslim Dialogue, Nuance, and Relationship in Polarized Times. Before we begin, I want to say a few words about why this conversation and these particular speakers matter. Today's dialogue is not happening between strangers. It emerges from a relationship that has been built over years of shared leadership. As chair of the Interfaith Center and executive director of Hillel, our speakers have navigated some of the most difficult and polarizing moments on our campus following October 7th. Together, they have worked through disagreement, public pressure, and the shared responsibility of helping to ensure the safety and well-being of all students. Their relationship reminds us of something important. Meaningful dialogue has never begun with agreement. It begins with trust. Relationship is the condition that makes successful dialogue both possible and responsible. That lesson feels especially relevant today. We're living in a moment where us versus them thinking has become the default posture of public discourse. Since October 7th, both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents have risen dramatically, and many Jewish and Muslim communities have experienced increased fear, grief, and polarization. At the same time, public discourse has become increasingly inhospitable to complexity, demanding certainty over humility, outrage over understanding, and the defensive positions long before we've taken the time to hear the full story. Across many communities, people feel the pressure to choose sides, to flatten complex realities into moral binaries, and view entire groups of people through the lens of their governments and wider geopolitical violence. In that environment, it becomes increasingly difficult to see one another as neighbors, rather than as stand-ins for larger political conflicts. That is precisely why conversations like this matter. Conversations about violence, identity, history, and human suffering carry ethical responsibilities. They require more than conviction. They require intellectual humility, careful language, accountability, and a willingness to acknowledge the limits of our own understanding. Responsible dialogue asks us to distinguish what we know from what we believe, to remain open to correction, and remain attentive to the impact our words have on real people and real communities. These are not optional virtues. They're the conditions that make meaningful dialogue possible. As we begin, I want to acknowledge both the limitations and expectations of our time together. First, neither of today's speakers represent the full diversity of Judaism or Islam, nor the many cultural, ethnic, theological, political, and social perspectives that exist within either tradition. Their reflections are rooted in their own lived experiences, leadership, and personal convictions. Second, some of the topics and language we engage today may evoke strong emotional responses. We ask everyone to participate with active listening, intellectual curiosity, and epistemic humility, a willingness to acknowledge that our own understanding is always partial and incomplete, and that genuine dialogue requires openness to learning. If at this moment you feel you're unable to engage in that spirit, we respectfully invite you to step away before we begin. We say that not to exclude, but to preserve the conditions necessary for this conversation to be meaningful and safe for everyone present. The outcome we hope for today's conversation is not greater certainty, but greater restraint. The discipline to ask better questions, listen more carefully, and acknowledge that our understanding of another person's history, identity, or suffering will always be incomplete. If today's conversation helps us cultivate that kind of humility, it will have served its purpose. So thank you again for being here. I want to warmly welcome our two speakers. Dr. Fatima M. Lemdi serves as the board chair of the Interfaith Center at Miami University and is a very active member of the local Muslim community, working with the Islamic Center of Westchester for 15 years. Whitney Fish is the immediate past executive director of Hillel at Miami University and the current chief program officer of the Mayerson JCC. So thank you both so much for being here and for your willingness to engage in this very difficult conversation. We seem to be living in a moment where people increasingly feel pressured to choose sides. Complex conflicts are reduced to moral binaries, and entire religious communities are treated as opposing teams. What do you think is driving that? What does it cost us? And how can we cultivate a way of engaging that makes room for complexity, multiple experiences of suffering, and intellectual humility? And I will open this to either of you who want to go first.
Well, Fatima has off camera asked if I would go first, and I first want to say thank you so much, Geneva and Fatima. This is such an honor. I was so thrilled to see both of your names in my inbox once again, dear friends, and I'm just so honored to be here to speak to this and from my own perspective and lens. So, breaking it down into three parts. The what drives side taking, in my opinion, we live in a world where the algorithm absolutely rewards certainty and fear and trauma and absolutely sidelines and collapses complexity and nuance. So I think what's driving it sometimes is genuinely the economy. It is a moneymaker. If you can absolutely, turn up the volume and poke at the bear and get people reacting. And most of the time, those reactions, especially in the online social media space, are really centered in fear mongering and delivering anger and requiring an angry response. I think the other thing is it's just easier to live in a binary, good guys versus bad guys. It genuinely asks nothing of us. Um, there's also this going back to, this space of awarding certainty. We also tend to award whatever in these binary spaces, this litmus test of allegiance. And when you live in a litmus test of allegiance, you are good if you do this, you are bad if you're this. And, obviously dependent on which end of the spectrum, because there's nothing in the middle anymore. There is, we just don't tend to listen and hear those. We're no longer able to really hear the complex. So in my opinion, what it costs is, you know, we lose actual people in our communities when we flatten individuals to represent a monolith or one view, right? We lose the nuance and complexity of humanity. If suffering becomes, or as it already is, in my opinion, a competition, then empathy reads as betrayal, and we've lost the ability to just see empathy as an act of humility and humanity. And I think it also corrodes our integrity. If we start policing dissent, even within our own communities, we start losing the complexity of who we are as complete, interesting individuals. And for the last part of the question, in my opinion, how do we make room for complexity? I mean, I think I'm constantly reminding myself and those around me and my own children, multiple things can exist at one time. I can believe and want Jewish safety as well as Palestinian dignity. These don't have to be competing commitments. I also personally think we have to start just eradicating this purity test, right? That you have to pick a side before you're allowed to mourn, before you're allowed to have an opportunity to be seen as valuable or valid, and start approaching people with more curiosity. Curiosity is lost, and I miss it so much. Asking ourselves, what am I missing? And just going in with more questions rather than assertions.
Thank you, Whitney. Fatima?
Yeah, thank you so much, Whitney, and thank you, Geneva, for the great introduction to both of us. And yes, me, I am a Muslim, but I don't represent the 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, the same as Whitney. And we work together very nicely through hard times at Miami, and we still working. So yeah, answering the question, I think I'm gonna follow Whitney. There are three parts to this question. What's the reason for this? People, they feel they have the urge to take sides. and they are like either to be in the good part or in the bad part. Or I think the reason number one is the media. I blame the media with all its forms, the written media, the social media, because it's really encouraged quick judgment instead of thoughtful conversation between people. And it's easier like for the media to put people into like categories of good and bad, as Whitney said, and then to understand the full story or experience or struggle and the pain behind the conflict for each group. And there is another thing, it's easier for people in general to understand people, others through the lens of categories. This person belongs to the bad group, and this is to the good group, and that to that group. And this is much easier for our brain to understand life and facts in this way. They are not facts, but we understand life. And the other thing, the fear and misinformation and the political polarization, and also make people feel they have to choose a side rather than listen and approach others with curiosity, as Whitney said. The cost is very, I think, is very hard, which is, I think all of you agree, the cost is the lack of opportunity to come all together as a group to understand each other experience and each other pain and struggle and needs. And people are like, the other cost is people are judged like because of like the action and behavior of a certain group, and we tend to like paint the whole group with a broad brush. So and the whole religion is being like judged this way, and this is more misunderstanding of the reality of the truth or of the story, or and less opportunity to work together for peace and justice. And what we can do, the other part of the question, what we can do in order to engage together and rise above this divide and this taken sides, and how to approach like conversation among groups, and specifically we are talking about the Jewish and Muslim groups. We should be willing to listen to others before we speak. We should be like understand that our perspective is one of many, and we can't understand the true story of others because we don't live the experience. Even though we like, I'm so deeply connected to the issue in the Middle East. I was born there and grow up there, and like, but I don't claim that I have full understanding. It's the problem, the conflict, the issue has been before I was born and still going on. So I don't have a true. So my judgment is just based on the information that I have, the limited information, or based on my perspective or where I came from. So, like approaching the conversation with the humanity, curiosity, listening before we speak, questioning the true or what we hear before we make the judgment, and relaying assumptions, and recognizing that there is more to the story than our limited understanding and our perspective. This is like it maybe leads to better understanding and a way to engage the group, to engage together and understand like maybe understand each other experience, and acknowledging when like the other group pain. And the other point I wanna like just highlight, acknowledging the other group pain does not demolish like from my experience, acknowledging what the Jewish like people go through there does not demolish the struggle that the Arab or the Palestinian go through. It's not one way or the other. We can stand against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia by just understanding that everyone, each group has their own experience that we need to be aware of, and we need to understand that struggle. And that this is how we can stand in the face of all like these, like the hatred and and we can care deeply about human dignity and for everyone. So real dialogue begins when we are willing to see each other as a human being, and we have unique, different perspective. And like we are like a human being, we come from different experience. We have unique story. We have hopes. We have fear. We have like shared values. That kind of conversation builds understanding, even when we don't agree on everything. And this is what we need to do.
Thank you, Fatima.
Mm.
So whether we're speaking from personal experience or from a distance, none of us, as you both alluded to, sees the whole picture. What does it mean to speak responsibly about people, communities, and conflicts while recognizing the limits of our own worldview? From the perspective of your respective traditions, is there a moral or religious obligation to practice that kind of humility? I guess I'll go back to you, Whitney.
Well, I think Fatima said it so beautifully, none of us sees the whole picture. Even, my lived experience, not even, but of course my lived experience is partial. Of course it's biased. Of course it has blind spots. I think proximity brings absolutely knowledge, and my own lived experience is a valid one, but it also comes with blind spots because again, multiple things can be true at one time. My view as an American Jew isn't the same as an Israelis or French Jews, or even a Jew living in Canada, or, Vermont versus where I live in Ohio. Our own identities and all the nuance of those identities and environment speak to who we are as individuals. And that, of course, we have to sit in and own that. Of course, I can't speak to another person's lived experience. But I also think speaking responsibly means owning where I speak from, but separating what I know from what I assume, and with all the attempts in the world for the human to just go with the ego, to staying open to correction. I think that's a lot of the times the rub is the ego doesn't allow us. Sometimes it's the stumbling block to our own attempts at humility and connection. From the religious Jewish perspective, the religion of Judaism, from that perspective, our community is very much holds what's called makloket, argument, holy. That is something that we are taught to do, to question, to wrestle with it, to hold two opposing views. One of our highest forms of education is in what's called chavruta, which is in partners, where we sit one across from the other and argue. You could argue for hours over one sentence in the Talmud, in Torah text, to really get to the meaning. That is how we are taught to learn in the highest form of learning. And so very much it's a religious obligation in the Jewish community, but also as a human being, I just think as an act of humility, being able to ask questions and get curious, but also through the lens of responsibility. It is tantamount, in our tradition, truth isn't owned by one person. We pursue it in relationship, together via argument, which is something that I'm extremely proud to, one of the many reasons I'm proud to be Jewish.
Thank you, Whitney. Fatima?
Yeah, beautiful, Whitney. I'm going to steal some of your words. Very nice what you said about like we all have a blind spot and the truth is not owned by one person, which is very true. How to speak responsibly about issues and like very complicated conflict, that the conflict is going on in the Middle East is we have to realize that whatever we know is not the full knowledge. It's just based on my own understanding and my own exposure. This is the other thing, my experience being an immigrant, an Arab immigrant or Muslim immigrant who is living away from that area for years, decades. I would have completely different perspective than a person who's still living there. So Speaking responsibly is very important, and it means like asking a question when we don't have full knowledge or information, and listening carefully to the other side. And the other thing is to avoid the stereotype and like avoid or uh, putting people in those broad categories and just like this group, they all alike. And like we come to discuss the issue with the pre-notion assumptions about what we feel and what we think about the group or about the issue. And the other thing is willing to learn from other people experience. By listening, we learn like things that we don't know. And and also being thoughtful like of our words. Words are very strong, like those weaponized words that people use, like they could deepen the divide between people. As we can like establish good relationship, and it can do, those words do the opposite. As a Muslim, I was encouraged, like Whitney said, by like my religion and by the Quran to seek knowledge, because whatever I know is not enough or is not in this comparing to like what the word has to offer or the knowledge of God. There is a verse in the Quran that says, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. It means whatever knowledge human being, have been given, it's just nothing. It's just a small portion of the God's knowledge and wisdom. And now I remember a story like of Prophet Moses. Whitney, the Quran has a lot of stories about Moses, a lot in the true religion, like either Christianity and Judaism or Islam. There are more to like bring them together, unify them than divides them. So there is a story about Moses being like he got the wisdom of God, and he got to be so knowledgeable when he got the message, and he felt like he wasn't very humble. He felt like he knows a lot. So God told him that, like comparing to the knowledge I sent to the universe, to the earth, what you know is just very limited. Even comparing to people, there are people who know more than you. And God asked him to go in a mission or to travel across the desert, and he will meet a person who knows a lot. And just very to summarize the story, so that person, he was a saint or another prophet, I can't remember his name. They got to know each other, and Prophet Moses met him, and they took a boat, like they sailed in a boat together. So that knowledgeable person, he put a hole in the boat. So Moses said, "Oh my gosh, what an evil action! What a like disgrace what you did." He said, "You don't know why I did this. Like this is for a reason, and I won't tell you." And he was doing many things that Moses did not understand with his limited knowledge, comparing to that person. He did not understand the reason behind these actions. So until they finished their trip, they came to an end. Then the knowledgeable person told Moses the reason behind one of them, the boat. He said the boat, it was like a king or the chief of that tribe of the sailor. If a boat is very nice, he will steal that boat and take it away from that person. So he made a hole so the king or the chief wouldn't take the boat from the person. And another one made like he killed the person, and while they were traveling, he found a kid. So the wise man, the knowledgeable man, killed that kid. So Moses was shocked, was surprised. This is awful. I can't stand this. This is like beyond my like my understanding. So after they finished it, he told him that kid, he had very nice parents, very righteous people, and this kid was written for him. Decided to grow up and be like not so good. So God's in His knowledge, no, taking that kid away, like for to benefit the parents, is for a good reason. For we are so limited. Whatever the reason why I'm talking about that, whatever we know from this world, we know just limited information comparing to God, what He knows. So, like, we have to approach everything, as Whitney said, with the humility. So humility does not mean like we become silent in face of these conflicts or issues, but to like understand that we put ourselves in learning position all the time, and we learn and we listen to others, rather than like speaking with like from just our perspective and our limited information and knowledge. Um, can you remind me what's the other part of the story? Uh, what's the other part of the question,
The other part of
Geneva?
the question,
Yeah,
I think that was the question. The perspective from your tradition about practicing that kind of humility. I think you
yeah,
answered
encourages that, yeah, be
No.
humble all the time and like, yeah, listen to others, understand their experience. I know it's very hard, like you say, you put yourself in people's shoes and try to see things from their eyes and their lenses. It's very hard for a human being to do, but this is at least you and like come to the conflict in a learning position or mood and try to understand other person's perspective. It's hard to feel to like I remember this my son when he had a kidney failure and I feel I remember I told him once, I feel you, son, I feel exactly what you mean or how I understand. He said, no, mom, you never really realize my feeling because I'm not in the experience, I'm not facing that, it's not me, it's him. So I from that and now I know, like I said, like I understand, but really I can't grasp that feeling, I can't truly feel it, just the person who is in the conflict.
Thank you, Fatima. So we've seen people hold Jewish communities collectively responsible for the actions of the Israeli government, just as we've seen Muslims collectively associated with terrorism or violent extremism. How do these kinds of conflations distort public discourse? And why is it so important to distinguish criticism of faiths or ideologies from prejudice against religious communities? I guess I'll turn it
I'm
back
listening to something here.
Oh, if you are not on mute, yes, thank you so much. Thank you. So I think, I think the core error, of course, Geneva, like you said, is treating a diverse community of people as a monolith and holding every single member accountable for state or a fringe group has absolutely huge implications, most likely violent ones, most common either way, or just for an individual, it's an eighth grader or a high schooler or a singer, a Jewish singer or actress being held responsible or being cornered on Gaza policy or synagogue threats after military action. It's when Jews are 0.2% of the world's population and most aren't Israeli, and Israeli Jews span the entire political and ethnic spectrum. And it's also holding 1.9 million Muslims responsible for groups like ISIS, which often, unfortunately, mostly harm other Muslims. It's hypocritical and drives me nuts. But it's also the oldest prejudicial logic there is, that this collective guilt replaces the individual with a category. And in my opinion, it's becoming increasingly more and more difficult to just be a human in this world and not have to, once again, to the first question, be held responsible, accountable for my entire community. I think the distinction matters because, again, it leads to violence, singling people out, ostracism, exclusion, and then also all those things can land those individuals into extremes. Like the irony is like this vicious cycle of when you exclude, when you ostracize because you aren't bringing in people, but you're making them responsible for an entire political policy, government's policy, you end up alienating and possibly moving people to the fringe. I think reminding and making sure that understanding the distinction between criticizing a government's policy as legitimate political speech and criticizing violent extremism, those are legit. But it does cross the line when it's attached to identity. I see you Jewish person, I see you Muslim person, and therefore you are responsible for holding, for in the case of a Jewish person, Benjamin Netanyahu's entire geopolitical policy. That's insane. We wouldn't ask that of an American, but we really ask it of these two very diverse groups of population. So I think it's helpful as a test if we, if we aim it at a policy or an action rather than that identity. Am I demanding that someone, a political figure, an actress, a leader, a VP of an organization, am I demanding that they denounce something that they had no part in as a price of acceptance? In my opinion, increasingly, we are doing this, and it has absolutely dire consequences.
Much, Whitney. Fatima?
Takes me time to unmute myself. Okay. So yeah, as Whitney said, I believe, one of the greatest obstacles to understanding like each other experience is when we judge the entire community or the group with the action of the individual few. As either like judging or like the whole Muslims based on what's the ISIS does or the Hamas does, or judging the Jewish community or the Judaism based on Netanyahu action and Gaza. This is not fair. It's just as it's not fair and harmful, like to assume that all Muslim like support terrorism or violent extremism. It's equally unfair to hold all Jewish people responsible for the action of the government, Israeli government. Both are examples of like prejudice that erase the diversity and thoughtful and experiences of both groups. Like every group, like any group, is made of like people who have different values and perspective and point of views and like ethics, and diversity within one group is as much as the diversity between the groups. And there is no the 0.3 like or 3 million, more than that, 6 million Jewish in the world. Is this right with me? And there are more diversity within the 1 point.
Yeah. It's 0.02%.
Yeah. So it's like even this is actually something I teach about the proven by the sociology, and there is the differences within one group is more than the differences between the group, because and especially when we come to the way, and Judaism and Islam is very alike in this way, because there is no a figure in both religions like a pope figure that like speaks on behalf of that group. There is none in Judaism or Islam. Like I'm not speaking about rabbi or imam; those are just the surface leaders. But kind of the hierarchical system, there is no hierarchical system when somebody speaks on behalf of the whole group. So criticizing the action of the government or the idea of political religious ideology or movement as ISIS, or it's very legitimate and part of the public discourse. However, that criticism should never become an attack on the people, on everybody like within the group. Or just because they are affiliated with that group or they are identified as Muslims or as Jewish. From the Islamic perspective, the Quran always teaches us like every person is accountable in his own action or her own action. In the Quran, in chapter 6, verse 164, as وَكُلِّ إِنسَانٍ أَلْزَمْنَاهُ طَائِرَهُ فِي عُنُقِهِ. It means no bearer of burden will bear the burden of another. Like each person is accountable for their own action. not for the action of any other person. Even they say, like in the culture, in the Arabic culture, we say something like, no dad will be judged on the sin or action or behavior of a son, and vice versa. No son will be judged based on the action or behavior of his dad. So everybody making their own choices and decisions. And this principle calls us to judge people as individual and to reject effective, like this collective blame. And if we truly want peace and justice, we must be able to criticize those policies and action without dehumanizing the religious community. And that requires empathy and be aware, be like thoughtful and in our thinking and behavior and our language, and like we need a commitment to seeing one another first as a human being, and like created with dignity and needs and rights, and these conversations become more productive when we resist stereotype and we seek to understand one another experience rather than assuming without knowledge or relying on inaccurate information or like incomplete information.
Thank you, Fatima. And I think it's important to maybe double click on what Whitney said about how scapegoating an entire group on the basis of extremism can actually push people into radicalization. I think we often forget that, and that is the opposite of what we're aiming to achieve when we voice dissent. So, okay. So getting to maybe the more difficult questions here, I want to talk about the word Zionism. The word Zionism has been one of the most contested terms in public discourse today. It often seems that people are having entirely different conversations when they are using the same word to mean fundamentally different things. For many, the word Zionism has become synonymous with colonialism, occupation, apartheid, genocide, or the policies of the Israeli government. For many Jews, however, it is understood as a movement of Jewish self-determination rooted in centuries of history, religious tradition, and the enduring connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. So Whitney, could you help us better understand the historical and religious origins of Zionism, how it has been understood within much of the Jewish community, and why those distinctions matter? From there, I'm curious, under what circumstances can anti-Zionism become anti-Semitism?
You really throw me the softballs, Geneva.
I know. No question. Easy question.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. So I'm going to go just reference the beginning of the convo when Janina so beautifully mentioned that, we are individuals not speaking on behalf of an entire group of people. So I'm going to do a scotch of history right now to the extent of my own personal knowledge and history and research, but understand that I am absolutely leaving stuff out. We don't have, that's a whole, the history of Zionism is a whole other workshop, and that's like a full day or week. So with that said, I think it's important to just pull down the lens of a word can mean one thing inside a community that birthed it, and what I have experienced both as a Jew who identifies as a Zionist and a Hillel director and a community leader within the Jewish community, it can also mean something else once it's pulled into political discourse. So to talk honestly, I want to put the word back in its original context first. The tragedy here is when the term is weaponized, which happens so often. I was, on TikTok the other day, just looking for gardening tips, and I came onto something that was funny and fun. Oh no, it was a deep dive into, it was like some celebrity gossip, of course, because we all have our thing. And it was about a Jewish actor. And sure enough, it had nothing to do with his political views, but you go down into the comments and you have, isn't he a Zionist? Isn't he a Zionist? This is what happens when we pull in watered down words. So um, for Jews, and I realize I'm saying I don't speak on behalf of one whole group, and I'm saying for Jews, so just I understand that. For most Jews, however, Zionism meant and has meant survival and belonging long before it became a slogan or used for political combativeness. It really means, and it's centered around connection, an ancient bond to this land over 3,000 years, woven into scripture. My husband says it daily when he prays in the morning. It's about identity. Jews pray facing Jerusalem. This has always been the way we pray. We pray east. Next year in Jerusalem closes out the Passover Seder, closes out Yom Kippur. The attachment predates modern politics, and that's so important to understand. That is just, it's fact. It just is. Political Zionism became a modern movement in the late 19th century. With the first Zionist Congress, and this was born out of a response to violent anti-Semitism, Russian pogroms, and most famously in Jewish community history, the Dreyfus Affair, which took place in France, which was the political assassination, not literally, but character assassination and demonization of a French Jewish reporter, and really was the first time we saw on a national or international rather um, playing field, this whole you must represent the entirety of the Jewish people. The lesson really became for the Jewish people, emancipation, assimilation didn't exist, didn't guarantee safety. Those were the big headlines for our community, that you can assimilate into an entire community, French Jews, American Jews, Spanish Jews, but you are not safe. You will always be singled out as a Jew, and there will be this deep systemic understanding that you have a dual loyalty. And then, of course, the Holocaust in the 1940s, late 1930s into the 1940s turned Zionism from one option into, for most Jews, an existential necessity. 6 million murdered while the world's doors stayed shut. It just is. That is our history. We are a small number of people. Our families are small because they were eradicated. So then how it became understood within the international Jewish population, first and foremost, Jews are a people. And I think we often forget that, the collective we, not only a religion. And it really meant at its core the right to self-determination in our ancestral homeland. It's not about supremacy, and I can't underscore, highlight, and bold that enough. It's inseparable from Jewish peoplehood, the original context of Zionism, inseparable. The part that I think most people don't understand is that nuance here is really crucial, because there is no single form of Zionism anymore. Post-Dreyfus Affair, we became introduced to: religious Zionism, cultural Zionism, political Zionism, labor strands. It is not the same as endorsing any given Israeli government. Many committed Zionists are anguished critics, myself included, of the occupation or the coalition. But when we're talking about the original purest form of what is Zionism, we're talking about an entire people's right to self-determination, ancestral homeland. That's it. When anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism is when we start dehumanizing, delegitimizing, and bringing in double standards. So it's important to say, what is not anti-Semitism, I think, first, which is criticism of Israeli policy is not anti-Semitism, full stop. Even sharp criticism. I make those criticisms myself. We just talked about how, as a people, we celebrate argument. We're taught to argue, right? So when you weaponize the word Zionism or someone's Zionist belief to shut down a debate, that's when we start getting into the slippery slope of anti-Zionism. It tips over when you're singling out the one Jewish state in the world or denying only Jews the self-determination granted to literally everyone else. When you start recycling old tropes, dual loyalty, Jewish control, blood libel, and you're dressing it up as anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Once again, as to the earlier point, when you hold Jews everywhere responsible for the acts of the Israeli government, that's anti-Semitism. When you deny the Jewish historical connection to the land, this slippery slopes into demonization, right? That being said, of course, there is so much debate in international conversations about what the definition of anti-Zionism is, but I have always used, and I say always, I mean, from the last 6 years since I learned it, Natan Sharansky's 3Ds, and that's the demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. So putting it through these three lenses, the 3D lens, is a handy way to help yourself understand, or your colleagues, your friends understand when you're engaging in that slippery slope. Naming that, calling it out is so unbelievably helpful to live a standard of interfaith dialogue and humanity. Um, Naming that thoughtful people argue over this is genuinely the humility that we would like to see in the world, and what this whole, conversation is about. The point isn't to make criticism of Israel off limits rather, it's to aim at policies, not at a people's right to exist and be safe.
Thank you, Whitney. And I really appreciate you attempting to answer what is likely the most controversial question I could have possibly asked you in this moment. And you did that beautifully. So I really appreciate that. And this could be a whole program in and of itself, but I know that we don't have time, and we are getting very close to the hour. So Fatima, I'm going to come to you and say, just as many people equate Zionism with the actions of the Israeli government, concepts like Sharia and jihad are often understood primarily through the actions of Islamist movements or particular Muslim majority governments. Could you, similarly to Whitney, help us better understand what these concepts mean within the Islamic tradition, why those distinctions matter, and how these conflations shape public understanding of them? How can we distinguish between legitimate criticism of governments or extremist ideologies and Islamophobia?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a very important question, even though the word jihad. Thank you, Whitney. You helped me understand a lot and make the difference between Zionism and anti-Semitism. It's just very, very easy way. If you read like a whole book, you wouldn't understand. I think for any religion, and one of the most challenging issue in any public conversation is these facing on trying to understand these complex religious concepts that they have been misused or hard to understand, or they have deep roots in the history and of the group, often people it's hard sometimes. The concept is so complicated and connected to, as I said, to the whole history, and it's hard to make sense and understand it in a clear, easy way. but like one of those or some of these words that like jihad for Muslims or Sharia, like when I hear sometimes word Sharia and how people pronounce the word, it makes me just, I laugh. Just the people they connect, they say Shariatullah, Shariatullah. This is how to say it in Arabic as two separate words. They come together, but they say Sharia law like it's a whole word, and it has been so misused. Like literally, the word yes exists in the Arabic word, but not just for religion. Or it's originally the word means like the path or the way, and it has very much broader meaning like than just the criminal law that what's portrayed in the media, and people like they think it's just about punishment, like people be beheaded or whatever punishment like um, and for most like Muslim, the word is just like very easy. It's like has a moral and ethical framework that guides everybody life, the way they treat each other, or how to like literally the 10 commandments: obey your parents and be nice to your neighbors, don't steal, don't kill, don't, if you do you get that. But at the same time there is a framework and there are instruction there into like how you live a good life and righteous life, like even how to pray and how you like conduct business in honest and real way and right way, and how to give the charity and how to seek justice and compassion and, and the majority of Muslims experience Sharia as personal commitment to like living a life that pleases God. There is no such a book, by the way. This is something I need to clarify it for people. There is no a book that's called Shariatullah. There is none. Uh, Muslims are obligated to follow the Quran. The only written book that Muslims are like they follow and they read in their daily is the Quran. There is nothing. Every other thing is just interpretation or like not the book that I have. Shariatullah to me, it's like God is pleased with me. Like I am a good citizen. I vote. I do my rights. I'm nice to my kids and and I know how to raise them a good way. I'm nice to my parents. This is what to me. And actually this is the whole word is just so it was revealed as the Quran told us. It's when he like in one of the chapters in chapter 42 verse 13, Surah Al-Shura, chapter Shura, it says it's talking about the Sharia. It wasn't like something invented or was given to the Muslims, or Muslims were ordered to follow something called Shariatullah or way of God. No, it was the way of the right path to all righteous people. Like it was like for Muslims, Jewish, Christian, all people of religion, they got message from God. They were like called to follow the will of God, the way of God in life, and how to like live the right life. So, and for in that chapter 42, it says, he has ordained for you of religion what he enjoyed upon Noah, and which we have revealed to you, O Muhammad, and what we enjoyed upon Abraham and Moses and Jesus, to establish the religion and not be divided among among yourself. So just the right way to be all united, doing what Allah wants you or God wants you to do on earth, like live the right life and be nice to others, and that's it with Sharia. But the way it's weaponized it or misuse it, it means it's all about punishment, or it's all, I'm not living my day. I wake up in the morning, I say, I'm gonna live today according to Sharia. There is nothing like that. It's just like the way I live my life as a Muslim is a way to follow God guidance. That's it. And the same with word jihad. Jihad is just, I see sometimes people like it means fighting or killing, or it's like the word, yes, exists in the language and it means struggle or striving. Like the primary understanding in Islamic tradition is the jihad means the inner struggle to become a better person, like even there is a saying from the prophet when they like go outside and they were like in a fighting in a battle, or they come back when they finish and they come back to their homes, they say, we came back from the smallest struggle or jihad to the biggest struggle, or the true real jihad, which is the inner struggle, like working in yourself. Am I okay?
Yeah, sorry. I think that was my AI was recording it. We're still going live. You're good.
Yeah, no problem. Anyway, so jihad is when, like, I'm sure everybody here, they know, they hear the word a lot, and it's like misused a lot and taken away from its real meaning. And it's, yes, the word is in the language and it means like the struggle you go through, either a struggle in discussing a conflict, or dealing with a conflict or issue, or dealing with yourself, with your inner self, which is harder, much harder than dealing with others, because you are kind of like the self-discipline and the way you live your life to be in the right path. And so this is like what jihad means in the language and used by Muslims or in the Arabic language. And speaking about the distinction, like between like what group of people, like how a group of people is judged based on the whole religion based on the action of select few, or the extremist group, or the if we define the Islam by the action of the extremist group, we misunderstand the faith, like the whole faith. Islam is just a religion like any other religion, came from the same source, from like Christianity and Judaism. And always I tell like my friends and or my students, like the thing about religions that was revealed, all religions were revealed like thousands of years ago. The verses in any religions are very general to be able to survive and work in different times and different places. And we are the people who make sense or who make change those verses, or make the, like, if you are violent person, of course you're going to interpret those verses in a violent way. If you are peaceful, you're looking for peace and love and justice and fairness, and you're going to find the verses you find, like it might be the same verse on the Quran, but people interpret it in two different ways based on how they feel and their values and their upbringing, their goals, their views, their perspectives. So in every major religion or faith, like, has people who misuse the religion to advance like political like ideology, or like political goals. There is an important difference between criticizing, as Whitney said, criticizing the government or the extremist ideologists, and like the prejudice against the whole religious group. It's entirely legitimate to criticize the group and being like, there is no fair, like there is no explanation to a group of people to go and kill innocent people. But like, and it's not fair to like place the judgment for Islam as a faith and religion as being violent, and because this group, they act their action, or they act in behalf or in the name of the Islam. So Islam is not inherently violent at all. Like, it's just a group of people, and what they do is based in ideology, or radical ideology that like serve this group, certain group of people. And yeah, and from an Islamic perspective, the Quran repeatedly teaches justice and fairness. It reminds believers not to let hatred or disagreement like cause them to abandon justice, and it teaches that every person is accountable for their own action. Those principles invite us to evaluate individuals and government in what they do, not on the religion they claim to represent. And as I said, Islam is so like different, like it's just a religion. People like who believe in Islam or they are Muslims, they are from different cultures, country, speak different languages, they have different traditions, they completely different. And if it's just they practice the religion of the Islam, of course, the way they practice will be affected by all these factors, by their race or their environment or their values or and ultimately our shared responsibility is to be like careful with our language. This is we go back and we talk about how to be mindful and thoughtful of our language and resist stereotypes and recognize the diversity that exists within the group as much as between the groups and like and we acknowledging like every group has the right, like Whitney to said, has the right to live a dignified life and have like their needs are met and they have the right to just and fair existence.
Thank you both. I know these are difficult concepts to talk about, and they are often so triggering to so many people. So I really appreciate you taking the time to really unpack them in such the best that can be done in such a short amount of time, and hopefully to let to maybe open our perspectives about what these words can mean to the respective communities before being reactive. So I'm gonna go now to our final question, and I know we are already a little bit over time, so thank you all who have stayed with us. Um, Many people argued that the interfaith movement has failed this moment. So I'm wondering if you both think that's true, and if so, why? Where has it fallen short, and what must fundamentally change if interfaith engagement is to remain credible and meaningful?
Yeah, I think from my view, and admittedly, I'm not as embedded in the interfaith space as I used to be. But that being said, I feel like where it's fallen short is it's been, I think well-intentioned folks have forgotten to basically sign a partner agreement, right? Like, what are we going to do when things go south? Because they will. How are we going to hold each other accountable in order to preserve the relationship? I think we also forgot to build the relationship. We were just nice, right? We had potlucks and we marched together, and you've come to our seders, our interfaith seders, and that's wonderful because we have to meet and congregate in order to build relationship. But the relationships were clearly not as double-sided or deeply invested within if it was, I'll stand with you as long as you see things my way. You know, real solidarity does not have a loyalty test attached to it. It just doesn't. You know, after October 7th, many Jews felt friends went silent or one-sided. That was the case for our lived experience at Hillel at Miami, except for the Interfaith Center and our beloved colleagues in the now defunct Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion. Um, Otherwise, we were out there wondering where our friends were. You know, Muslims, in my opinion, long have felt their pain minimized. You know, and we have both learned the friendship may not hold as much weight as we thought, mostly because it's easier to avoid the hard conversation and then risk the relationship. So we never like built that muscle to disagree, but to stay rather, to really say, I respectfully disagree, but this relationship is too valuable for me to walk away. I know a beloved colleague in our community who does, you know, deep work within the Muslim community as a Jewish leader. He had friends he thought would be there forever, just never speak to him again. Um, it's easier to notice when others fail us, but it is certainly harder to sit with it when we've failed them. And I would love to see folks own up where they, went silent. I had a beautiful conversation with a lifelong friend during the kind of memification and performative space that social media tends to bring with advocacy, who posted a really hateful meme on Instagram back when I was on Instagram, which I am happily not, and it's been 3 years, and my God, is my life nicer. But she posted a meme that was dripping in dog whistles of anti-Semitism, and I reached out and I said, "I need you to understand what this, and this means. You make your decisions, but I want you to know what this means and what it means to me." And we had a beautiful conversation. I didn't ask her to take it down. It's her choice, but I just wanted her to have the information. And she ended up taking it down, and it was a wonderful, and we continued that conversation. Um, but that was one of that was one wonderful experience, when unfortunately that did not get outweighed by the many disappointing experiences. Um, in my opinion, what has to change is being allowed to grieve with you without co-signing your politics, and to not engage in the suffering Olympics. Um, your suffering doesn't need my agreement to be real to me, if that makes sense. It's valid regardless. I don't have to agree to your politics to see you as the person in front of me who is truly suffering and hurting. Um, that's hard, and I think that it would be nice to see our leaders engage in that more often. I think showing up when it costs the most, not just when it's easy, not just, breaking bread for the gram, but when it's real, when it's hard. Um, Getting out of this zero sum instinct, making room for your pain doesn't diminish mine. So let's make room for others' pain. And to stay in the room. There are swaths of individuals who won't even sit down and talk. And this is something that was really difficult in the college space of this. If I sit down and talk with the opposing side, then I will be seen as giving in or not ardent enough or not an advocate. And my identity is wrapped up in being this advocate. And if we're not willing to keep facing each other, then we're crumbling, right? Like, we're seeing the results of that. If we haven't failed, if we can name where we let each other down. So the more we can do that, the more we can model the humility we need to see in the world. It's really about us choosing to show up. In my opinion, that's what solidarity looks like, and to not look for heroes, because everyone will fail you if you're searching for the one perfect representative of the thing you need.
Thank you, Whitney, so much for that honest answer. Fatima, I'm gonna turn to you now.
Yeah, very quick. I know you're running out of time, but yeah, I'm gonna echo a lot of what Whitney just said about the interfaith. Is just it's not new, but it has a lot of responsibility in the face of these very complicated issues and conflict. A lot of people, they feel like they are like disappointed from the interfaith movement and work, like because they feel like in face of these challenges and issue, the interfaith work is just so cautious, and really sometimes they accuse the interfaith people being disconnected with the reality and the real pain and like people experience in all sides. So just the community often feel that they suffer and struggle is not like really being understood or acknowledged, and that relationship we build in peace are very fragile and they can't stand in face of these challenges. And at the same time, I don't believe it's just the interfaith work or movement failed completely, but has a lot of work to do. Let's put it this way, like, and if anything, this is the moment that we reveal whether our relationships are genuine. And real interfaith work is not just about sharing, as Whitney said, sharing meals or celebrating each other holidays or like discussing and finding our common ground and similarities. It's about staying on the table even and continue the conversation even when we don't agree on the issue and we have different views and perspective. Listening with humility and speaking truthfully and refusing to let fear or anger dehumanize the other person or the other group. And from my perspective as a person, like Islam just teach me like that diversity and differences exist among people, and this is the purpose of our life. God said, or Allah in the Quran, that, "O people, I created you from tribes and to different tribes and people, and I give you the opportunity and to get to know each other." And this is the beauty about life. We are all alike and we face the same issues in life and we deal with same challenges. There is no life won't be interesting. But like the diversity among us and the differences, this is like for a reason. So we get to understand because of these differences, we face different challenges and different circumstances, and we need to come together and get to know each other and understand each other needs, perspective, and we approach like others with honesty and respect and compassion. And so I believe that interfaith engagement must become more courageous, and we need spaces where people can express like grief and ask different difficult questions and even disagree, or like when it's time to disagree. We don't have to agree about everything, and like we stop seeing each other, to stop or like where like raise awareness about like the biases that live inside us and the stereotypes and the assumptions that we make like toward others. We must also be willing to acknowledge when and like how to criticize our own community when it falls short, and to condemn prejudice when it happens even within our local communities, and whether it's like anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, or like hatred toward any of these groups. So like the interfaith has, it's not completely failed, but it has a lot to do and a long way to go. The credibility of the interfaith movement will not be measured by whether we agree on every political issue. It will be measured by whether we continue to see each other as a human being worthy of dignity, whether we defend one another against hatred, and whether we build a relationship strong enough to stand in face of these challenges. And this is what we're trying to do. And I think, as I said, it has a long way to go, but it's in the right path, but the work is not completely finished. And yeah.
Thank you both for those very thoughtful and honest answers about the challenges we face. I think it's interesting that the interfaith movement kind of prides itself as a relationship building movement. And yet I think what has appeared is the superficiality of that and the failed solidarity. Like our relationship building has not been what we claim it to be. And I thank you both for being an example of what that can look like, and for sharing that relationship and that vulnerability in this space with everyone here. So we are, I mean, I don't actually recall if we were supposed to go 60 minutes or 90 minutes. I think our original dialogue was supposed to be about 60 minutes, and we are about 80 minutes now, right? So I guess we could take one or two questions or comments from those who have remained with us on the call. If anyone has a question they would like to ask before we wrap up, I will invite you now. If you would like to ask a question in the chat or raise your hand, you're welcome to do so. Again, please maintain the respectful tone that we have achieved throughout the entirety of this conversation. And I see, Whitney, you're saying you do have to be off in 10 minutes. Okay. So maybe one question, if anyone, if anyone. May we have more conversations like this? Yes, we hope to. Hopefully this will be the first of many, and I hope that the interfaith movement beyond the Interfaith Center will take both of your advice and be more courageous in addressing difficult conversations. It's the only way we grow, heal, learn, build relationship. Does anyone have a question or comment they'd like to ask? Don? Okay, yes.
Yeah, you know, my computer, can you hear me? I've been having trouble.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, because something happened with my webinars and Zoom. Here is my question. I'm Jewish. I went to the American Youth from 1972 to 76. When I went to college, the choice was my interest and, you know, other reasons. Now, I think 90% or higher of Jewish families, when they're selecting a college for their child, they will discuss, is it a safe place for somebody Jewish at that college? What does that say about what's happening in our society? What might be able to be done about it? And does the Interfaith, your group, get involved with that issue?
Thank you, Don. Do either of you want to answer that? I mean, we are at the Interfaith Center is at Miami University, and Whitney was also a Hillel at Miami University, so maybe we are poised to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say Geneva is, you know, I no longer even work there, and she's still doing the work. I mean, Geneva and the Interfaith Center and Fatima are wonderful partners in this. So I think, you know, it really matters. And also to remember that 19 and 20-year-olds are 19 and 20-year-olds. And I think honestly, often some of the struggle is that unbeknownst or well-intentioned adults in the room tend to make 19 and 20-year-olds speak up and speak out and fight anti-Semitism or fight Islamophobia, so much so that they forget that they're only barely just adults, if that. But to your earlier point, Don, you know, it is a reality. I have a 14-year-old and we moved here. I have a 14-year-old, 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And when we moved here from Los Angeles 6 years ago, one of the reasons we didn't settle in Oxford was I wasn't going to drop, you know, Jewish kids from LA into the Talawanda school district because I wasn't quite comfortable with the lack of community and couldn't really find a space where I thought this, you know, there's not only there's tolerance, that's such a 1990s word, but there's acceptance of the other. It just didn't seem like that was going to be a safe choice for my kids. And so unfortunately, you know, that I honestly am so thrilled we made the right decision. We moved into Blue Ash, which is now 5 minutes from where I work, but it's the reality. It absolutely is the reality. And also I have still people in my own Jewish orbit who still go to, you know, traditionally quite difficult schools for Jewish folks. It just matter, you know, dependent on who you are and what it is you want to take on or not take on.
Very good. Yes, Dan, thank you. This is very good comment. It means the interfaith work or movement has a lot to do. It means like the interfaith provide the space, a safe space for different stakeholders and groups to come together and reach out to each other and like highlight the common goals and like raise the awareness about the right for each group to give their rights and like have a safe space and it's I understand what you mean and like being a Muslim and minority and living in like in America and even I am an immigrant like I understand how people like live with fear. What does it mean? Especially for a student, as Whitney said, like barely adults, 18 and 19 years old. And I see it at Miami and I see it like it was like very tough time for the Jewish group students and the Muslim students and now many other students like the LGBT community now at Miami and many other facing very similar like challenges being like excluded or being like not finding the safe space for them to live their like experience as a student. But this is like highlights the work that we all need to do.
People, so we have 4 minutes, so maybe one more question if anyone has one. Delia?
Yes. Hi. I had the privilege in my life of in two different times between 30 years difference, having been to the land of Israel to be in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and so on by a difference of 30 years, having seen the great difference, and unfortunately, the greater the divide. And I guess where I feel the sadness when I went to Israel the second time, a greater sadness because I felt there was more division, more violence toward each other, and I guess that's why many people feel that that interfaith has failed because we all go to our own little corners and we don't want to come out, maybe because it's frightening. But the reality is that all over the world, people are killing Christians as well as Jews, as well as Muslims. And there is just rampant hatred, unfortunately, that is being unleashed, I guess, toward almost anybody that wants to believe in God, whatever you want to call him. Okay, that's the reality. It's not just anti-Semitism. It's also against Muslims. It's also against Christians, even in Christian countries like Colombia and Ecuador, where it was been forbidden for people to even have processions on their holy days. You would never have thought of that, right? That in a so-called Christian country. Here I'm watching, in Texas where I live, that same thing of words like Sharia being used incorrectly and saying, oh, we don't want Sharia. Well, I think, how can you say that? Because that is their whole way of life. You cannot say that you can deny a people their whole way of life just because you think it's all about punishment. So it's true what you're saying, that there's so much misunderstanding, misinformation, AI being used, right, to lie and make phony pictures of what it's like in Israel, what it's like to be a Muslim, what it's like to be a Palestinian. I was privileged to see it all myself in person. I was privileged to have gone even to Kuwait before the war, against Iran and Iraq, and so I know how much the misinformation, how much this false religion, which is to say, oh, I am going to be extra good, so I persecute this group, I persecute that group, and it's wrong. It's all wrong. And what you're saying is so true, that people just want to go into their own little belief, their own little corner, and then hurt others. And so, I understand this very much. And there are people like me who suffer not pity party for only myself, but actually just feel sorrow, universal sorrow, for all of us that are being persecuted in one way or another. Thank you. Shalom, salam, peace.
Thank you for that comment. Okay, well, I know, Whitney, that you have to go right at
Yeah,
2:30,
thank
right?
you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you guys so much for having me and for letting me be in this space. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Whitney.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you to everyone who has stayed with us for the whole 90 minutes and for your thoughtful questions and comments. And I hope this will be the first of many more conversations like this one. So enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Bye, everyone.